First Battles of the U.S. Army Northwest Indian Wars, complete series. 1787. 11 years have elapsed since the United States of America proclaimed its independence from the British Empire. However, the task of establishing a new nation is proving to be a significant challenge for the Americans. The nascent republic is entangled in debt, alongside political and economic instability. Unpaid and desperate veterans of the War of Independence initiate an uprising known as Shays' Rebellion. Although the new federal government manages to endure this crisis, it is constrained by the Articles of Confederation, the nation's initial constitution, which greatly restricts its authority. Consequently, later that year, legislators convene in Philadelphia to formulate a new U.S. Constitution, which grants considerably enhanced powers to the executive branch. Simultaneously, in the newly designated Northwest Territory, another crisis is emerging. In principle, this expansive area has been ceded to the United States by the British following the Revolutionary War. It spans from the Appalachian Mountains in the east to the Mississippi River in the west, and from the Great Lakes in the north to the Ohio River in the south. This territory encompasses 300,000 square miles of uncharted land, rich in natural resources, and from the perspective of the U.S., is primed for expansion. The federal government intends to sell this land to settlers in order to alleviate its substantial debts from the Revolutionary War, totaling approximately $40 million. There is no lack of interest. Thousands of settlers are eager to journey westward, to establish new farms and communities, and to embark on new lives on the frontier. However, a significant issue persists. Thousands of settlers have already crossed into the Northwest Territory illegally, and the Native American tribes residing there are poised to fiercely oppose any encroachment on their ancestral lands. The United States appears to be unwittingly entering a war of conquest for which it is ill-equipped. This conflict is against an adversary that it significantly underestimates. For nearly 2 centuries, European settlers have been encroaching upon Native American territories, leading to widespread violence. Some tribes in the eastern regions have faced near total destruction. During the War of Independence, in which many Native Americans sided with the British, fierce confrontations erupted along the frontier. Warriors from tribes such as the Miami, Shawnee, and Lenape, also known as the Delaware, targeted American settlements along the Ohio River, aiming to expel the intruders. Local militia units, composed of part-time settler soldiers, retaliated with violent raids. A particularly infamous event occurred in 1782 at Gnadenhutten, where Pennsylvania militiamen killed 96 defenseless Lenape Christian converts, including men, women, and children. Native American counterattacks were equally ruthless, resulting in numerous casualties on both sides, perpetuating a cycle of violence that persisted for years. However, the U.S. government is now resolute in its intention to establish a structured and secure settlement in the region. Moreover, it aims to initiate the sale of land to settlers, corporations, and speculators. Since gaining independence, the U.S. government has enforced a series of inequitable treaties upon Native Americans, asserting their claim to the land through conquest and employing bribes, threats, and violence to achieve its objectives. Congress has now taken a further step by formally designating the Northwest Territory, complete with explicit regulations for its surveying and settlement. Under the guidance of Mohawk Chief Joseph Brant, the tribes have united to form the Northwestern Confederacy. They categorically reject the treaties established by the United States and the proposed plans for settlement. These tribes are resolute in their commitment to halt U.S. expansion at the Ohio River and are prepared to engage in conflict to achieve this goal. As violence escalates throughout the Northwest Territory, the responsibility to address this crisis falls upon George Washington, the first President of the United States. Inaugurated in April 1789, Washington confronts numerous significant challenges during his initial term, including the national debt and the emerging factions within his cabinet. The intensifying situation in the Northwest Territory now adds to his list of concerns. Washington expresses his desire to engage with Native Americans in a manner that is both honorable and just. However, he remains steadfast in his commitment to the security and expansion of the Republic. Additionally, he faces pressure from a powerful group of land speculators, including his Secretary of War, Henry Knox, who are urging him to take decisive action. Their primary concern is that the ongoing violence in the Northwest Territory could jeopardize their investments. In 1789, a final effort is made to convince the tribes to relinquish their land. However, the negotiations at Fort Harmar are boycotted by the most influential tribes. Consequently, in the summer of 1790, Washington authorizes military intervention. He instructs the U.S. Army to conduct a show of force intended to deter further assaults by Native Americans on U.S. settlers. This directive amounts to an invasion. The command of the expedition is entrusted to Brevet Brigadier General Josiah Harmar, the highest-ranking officer in the Army. He is a distinguished veteran of the Revolutionary War, having served alongside Washington at Valley Forge. Harmar is also reputed to be a heavy drinker and insists that his troops adhere to the European style of warfare, which emphasizes drill and close-order formations that are ill-suited for combat. On the frontier, the resources available to him are severely limited. The Continental Army, which had previously triumphed over the British, has long since been disbanded. In its stead, Congress has sanctioned the establishment of a single infantry regiment comprising approximately 700 men. Consequently, the majority of Harmar's expedition will consist of militiamen from Kentucky and Pennsylvania, many of whom lack the experience typical of seasoned frontiersmen. Instead, they are often individuals who are unable to evade militia service due to a lack of resources or intelligence. Many are either elderly or very young, possessing minimal training, and no familiarity with the wilderness, which starkly contrasts with the adversaries they are about to confront. General Harmar intends to lead his forces northward from Fort Washington, traversing 150 miles of predominantly forested trails, with the objective of annihilating the Miami settlement at Key Kayonke. He will receive support from another mixed contingent of regulars and militia, totaling 330 men, under the command of Major Hemtramck, who will march from Vincennes. On October 7, 1790, Harmar embarks on the first significant military operation of the United States since gaining independence. After an 8-day journey, his forces arrive at the Miami village of Key Kayonke, only to discover it has been set ablaze and deserted. The Miami have burned their own homes and seemingly disappeared. However, Harmar's troops are under surveillance. Hundreds of warriors from the Northwest Confederacy have gathered to oppose the U.S. incursion. They are led by Miami War Chief Mish Kanakwa, also known as Little Turtle, Shawnee Chief Wayapir Senwa, referred to as Blue Jacket, and Bakonga Halas of the Lenape. These leaders and their warriors are resolute, well-armed, and intimately familiar with their territory. Meanwhile, 150 miles to the southwest, Hemtramck's militia has mutinied, refusing to proceed further into the forests, forcing him to retreat. General Harmar finds himself isolated. His forces spend 4 days incinerating villages in the vicinity and destroying any food supplies they can locate. On October 19th, one of his companies falls victim to an ambush. Over 100 warriors launch an attack, causing 150 militiamen to flee in panic. A lone platoon of regular soldiers stands firm, but suffers a devastating massacre. Approximately 30 U.S. soldiers lose their lives, and another 40 militiamen go missing. 2 days later, Harmar concludes that his mission has been accomplished and departs for Fort Washington. Shortly thereafter, his scouts inform him that villagers are returning to Kikayonge. Eager to confront and defeat the enemy, Harmar's forces initiate a dawn assault, anticipating the advantage of surprise. However, they once again encounter an ambush. In the ensuing chaotic combat, over 100 U.S. soldiers are killed, scalped, and left on the battlefield. Many today mistakenly believe that scalping was solely a Native American practice. In reality, for over a century, it had been adopted by European settlers, often incentivized by colonial authorities who offered bounties for native scalps as evidence of death. What originated as a ritual among certain tribes had become widespread, routinely practiced by both factions in the frontier conflicts. Harmar returns to Fort Washington with his demoralized troops, claiming a measure of success. He has, after all, destroyed 5 Miami villages and significant grain supplies. This represents a severe setback for the tribes, leading to considerable hardship that winter. However, perspectives on the expedition vary. It is recorded in history as Harmar's defeat. At that time, it marked the largest U.S. defeat at the hands of Native Americans. Although Harmar is later acquitted by a court-martial, his reputation remains tarnished. Throughout that winter, both sides persist in their raids across the Northwest Territory. In January 1791, at Big Bottom, Lenape and Wyandot warriors killed 12 settlers, including 2 children. Such incidents incited widespread fear throughout the region and posed a significant threat to the U.S. settlement initiative, which had become crucial to various powerful interests. As a result, settlers became increasingly hesitant to venture westward. Land speculators expressed their outrage. In response, President Washington sought the assistance of Arthur Sinclair, the 54-year-old governor of the Northwest Territory, who was originally from Scotland. Sinclair possessed extensive military experience. Like Washington, he had served as a British officer during the French and Indian War, and in 1759 he participated in the assault on Quebec alongside General Wolfe. During the Revolutionary War, he joined the Continental Army and was present with Washington during the famous crossing of the Delaware. However, his reputation suffered in 1777 when he chose to surrender Fort Ticonderoga to the British without engaging in battle. Currently, Sinclair is afflicted by severe gout. Nevertheless, President Washington appointed him as Major General and tasked him with leading a second expedition against the Northwestern Confederacy. This time, the tribes were to receive a harsh and unmistakable lesson. They were to either comply with U.S. demands or face destruction. Congress approved the formation of a second regular infantry regiment for the expedition. However, the unattractive nature of frontier service made it challenging to recruit sufficient personnel to fill the ranks. As a result, Sinclair's force would consist of approximately 2,000 men rather than the initially anticipated 3,000 or 4,000. This contingent included 500 regular infantry from the 1st and 2nd Regiments, 100 mounted dragoons, and 10 3-pounder and 6-pounder cannons. The 1st and 2nd Levy Regiments contributed 800 short-service volunteers, although nearly all of these individuals were inexperienced recruits. Captain Faulkner's Pennsylvanian riflemen, though seasoned frontier combatants, number only 60, in stark contrast to the 400 Kentucky militia, the majority of whom lack any combat experience. The Northwestern Confederacy is acutely aware that their triumph over General Harmar will provoke a response, prompting them to brace for another assault from the United States. For the tribes involved, this situation presents a formidable challenge as they face a struggle for survival, fully cognizant that their families, communities, and means of subsistence will be indiscriminately targeted. In response to this common threat, warriors from approximately 12 tribes unite, forming a collective force of around 1,400 individuals, thus creating one of the largest Native American armies ever assembled on the frontier. Miami War Chief Little Turtle is set to take a prominent role once more, alongside fellow leaders Blue Jacket and Bakonga Halas. The war chiefs organize their warriors based on tribal affiliations and languages, ensuring they are well equipped for the impending conflict. Many of these warriors are armed with brown base muskets, which have been supplied by the British at Fort Detroit. In preparation for close quarters combat, they carry clubs, tomahawks, and knives. A significant number of warriors engage in the ritual of painting their faces before battle, a practice that serves both as a psychological tactic to instill fear in their adversaries and as a form of spiritual preparation. In the summer of 1791, Sinclair has been instructed to depart from Fort Washington by July 10th and make his way to the Miami villages at Kikayonga. President Washington has specifically cautioned him to remain vigilant against potential ambushes during the march. Upon neutralizing any resistance at Kikayonga, Sinclair is tasked with constructing a fort and stationing 1,200 men there. This fortification will enable the United States to assert its dominance in the region and counteract British influence emanating from Fort Detroit. Although the British were expected to have vacated this outpost following the Revolutionary War, they have remained, utilizing it as a base to foster and support Native American opposition to U.S. interests. However, Sinclair's expedition faces significant challenges even before it embarks. The supply system of the U.S. Army is heavily dependent on private contractors, many of whom exhibit blatant corruption. As a result, a significant portion of the funds allocated for the expedition has been misappropriated, leaving Sinclair critically lacking in food, ammunition, and equipment. Valuable weeks are wasted as he desperately attempts to procure adequate supplies for his troops, while simultaneously conducting rapid training for the numerous inexperienced recruits in his command. Concurrently, 2 preliminary assaults are executed against the Native American tribes. In May, Brigadier General Charles Scott spearheads a mounted militia raid that incinerates several villages and captures 41 hostages for future negotiations. 2 months later, Lieutenant Wilkinson orchestrates a second raid, resulting in the destruction of additional villages and crops. This second raid yields 34 hostages, including the daughter of Little Turtle, the Miami War Chief. These operations are intended to distract the tribes and destabilize them in anticipation of the main offensive. However, they only serve to infuriate and unify the Northwestern Confederacy to an unprecedented degree. By the time Sinclair's army is prepared to advance north that autumn, the Confederacy will be poised and ready. During the summer, Sinclair's forces gather near Fort Washington, which is present-day Cincinnati, Ohio. The troops then proceed 18 miles to the banks of the Great Miami River, where they establish a supply base known as Fort Hamilton. General Sinclair, however, must travel 70 miles to Lexington to secure his militia reinforcements. Ultimately, he receives only 400 men, which is less than half of what he had anticipated. During his absence, Major General Richard Butler assumes command. At 48 years of age, Butler, an Irish-born individual, had established himself as a prominent regimental commander during the Revolutionary War, receiving frequent commendations from Washington himself. He possesses significant experience in negotiations with the Northwestern Confederacy and is personally acquainted with several of its chiefs. Following Sinclair's directives, Butler is set to lead the army northward as soon as Fort Hamilton is completed. It is now October 4th, marking a delayed commencement for what was initially intended to be a summer campaign. The nights have turned colder and the days are becoming shorter. The Army's progress through the forest is excruciatingly slow. The narrow paths require widening to accommodate wagons and artillery, yet there is a critical shortage of axes and saws. During the first 5 days of the advance, the Army manages to cover an average of only 4.5 miles per day. Upon rejoining the Army, Sinclair is incensed by the sluggish pace of advancement. However, he faces persistent challenges due to inadequate equipment and supplies. His primary concern is the lack of flour necessary for bread production. On October 12th, heavy rainfall is succeeded by the first frost, causing Sinclair's army to come to a standstill in the freezing mud. The conditions for the troops are deplorable. Continuous rain has led to a reduction in rations, resulting in plummeting morale. Desertions among the soldiers are increasing at an alarming rate. Remarkably, the 6-month contracts of many levy troops begin to expire during the campaign. Understandably, as their terms conclude, many opt to return home. 9 days into the advance, and 40 miles north of Fort Hamilton, Sinclair issues orders for the establishment of an additional supply base. Fort Jefferson will be the name of this new installation, which is projected to take 2 weeks for construction. Sinclair's choice to secure his supply line in this manner is a sound military strategy. However, this approach is proving to be time-consuming. His troops continue to endure harsh conditions, remaining cold, wet, and hungry. At Fort Jefferson, 3 soldiers are apprehended while attempting to desert. In response, Sinclair opts to make an example of these individuals, resulting in their execution by hanging. The Army's strength has now dwindled to 1,500 personnel. A significant portion of the force, approximately 1/3, has been lost due to illness, desertion, or has been left behind to garrison various forts. The situation has deteriorated to the point where Sinclair contemplates a retreat. He is also afflicted by severe gout attacks, which hinder his ability to ride. Despite these challenges, he resolves to press forward. A few days later, snowfall begins, and the Army, having once again exhausted its flour supplies, is forced to halt. As U.S. troops await the arrival of supplies, Little Turtle and other leaders of the Northwestern Confederacy are devising their strategy in response to the expedition. They have been monitoring the slow advancement of Sinclair's forces and have already targeted a few stragglers and deserters. They recognize that their numbers are now comparable. Instead of retreating as they had done the previous year, the chiefs decide to confront the U.S. Army directly in battle. The dense forest and their experience as hunters and warriors provide them with a tactical advantage. This decision marks a departure from their typical hit-and-run strategies and carries significant risk. The stakes are indeed high. General Sinclair remains unaware of the imminent threat. His limited number of scouts from the allied Chickasaw tribe have failed to identify the substantial enemy presence. In a critical move, Sinclair anticipates the arrival of an essential flour convoy and fears it may be intercepted by deserters from his own ranks. Consequently, he orders Major Hamtramck and 300 of his finest troops from the 1st Regiment to locate the convoy and ensure its safe passage back to the Army. He then continues his march. On November 3rd, convinced that he is close to his objective, Kikiangi, despite being utterly disoriented, he issues the command to establish a camp. He selects a location on a steep plateau adjacent to the Wabash River. Relying on the natural defenses of the terrain, he neglects to order any fortifications for the camp. While the majority of the Army sets up in a rectangular formation on the elevated ground, the limited space forces the militia companies to encamp 300 yards away across the Wabash, near a shallow stream. In the event of an attack, mutual support between the two camps would be exceedingly challenging. At that moment, over 1,000 warriors from the Northwestern Confederacy are gathering just 2.5 miles away. They are fully aware of the U.S. forces' location, and at dawn the following morning they will launch their assault. On November 4th, in the frigid early morning darkness, 1,200 warriors take their positions in a crescent formation. To the left are the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi warriors. To the right stand the Wyandota, Mingo, and Cherokee. In the center are the Shawnee, Lenape, and Miami. Just before 7 a.m., as the first rays of sunlight pierce through the trees, they unleash a resounding war cry and advance. Meanwhile, in the U.S. camp, soldiers are preparing breakfast. Whispers of recent Native American sightings circulate, but these reports have not reached General Sinclair. Suddenly, militia sentries to the west are struck with horror as they witness hundreds of warriors emerging from the trees. They discharge their weapons and flee, pursued by a barrage of musket fire. The untrained militia are caught completely off guard. They manage to fire a few shots before either retreating or being struck down where they stand. The camp is swiftly overwhelmed, with survivors desperately navigating the frigid waters of the Wabash and scrambling up the slope toward the main encampment. Here, U.S. regulars and levy regiments stand ready, alerted by the sounds of war cries and the crack of musket fire. Their 6 cannons are primed and prepared to fire. However, panic-stricken militia flood into the camp, obstructing the line of fire. Targeting an enemy that moves in small, agile groups, darting from one cover to another, proves to be a challenge. When the cannons finally discharge, their shots soar high, crashing through the branches above. As Miami, Shawnee, and Lenape warriors launch a frontal assault on the camp to draw attention, the 2 flanks of the Native American army maneuver through the woods to encircle Sinclair's position. U.S. outposts are swiftly overrun or retreat back to the main camp. From their concealed positions, Native American sharpshooters begin to eliminate U.S. gun crews and officers. In a mere 30 minutes, a quarter of Sinclair's forces have either become casualties or fled into the woods. The situation deteriorates rapidly, with more men falling every moment. Recognizing the peril his army faces, Sinclair instructs Lieutenant Colonel Dark, who commands the 1st Levy Regiment, to secure the rear of the camp. Dark mobilizes 5 companies, approximately 300 men, and leads them in a wheeling bayonet charge to the right, supported by 50 mounted dragoons on the left. The Wyandot warriors initially retreat before them. Yet this is a ruse. They are drawing the U.S. troops out of their defensive positions. By the time Dark's forces reach Buck Run Creek, they find themselves cut off and encircled. The Wyandots renew their assault, inflicting significant casualties on Dark's men as they retreat toward the camp. Simultaneously, Shawnee warriors attack the southern end of the camp, where the terrain is less steep. They overpower the dragoons and levy troops stationed at the perimeter, breaking into the heart of the camp. Wounded soldiers and civilians, including camp followers, servants, cooks, wives, and a few children, find themselves under fire as they seek refuge behind the front line. Tragically, dozens lose their lives. In response, Sinclair orders Major Hart, who commands the 2nd Regiment, to clear the camp at bayonet point and rescue any survivors. Although Hart's assault proves effective, he is shot and killed, resulting in significant casualties among his men. Approximately half of the U.S. regular officers are now deceased, and Major General Butler, the 2nd in command, has sustained 2 wounds. Amidst the chaos, some soldiers, overwhelmed by the unfolding horrors, surrender to despair and seek shelter wherever they can. The time is now 8:30 a.m., and a brief lull in the fighting ensues, which Sinclair seizes to tighten his defensive perimeter. This moment of quiet serves as a precursor to the impending storm. Little Turtle and the war chiefs are mobilizing their forces for a final assault. 2 hours have elapsed since the initial engagement, and Sinclair realizes that if they do not break through the enemy lines immediately, his entire contingent faces annihilation. The few surviving officers rally the troops for a desperate charge back down the path they had previously traversed. With bayonets fixed, the U.S. regulars lead the charge, pushing through the enemy skirmish line. Those who are still able to walk hasten behind them, leaving behind many wounded to their grim fate. The breakout quickly devolves into a frantic scramble as terrified survivors abandon their weapons and equipment in their flight to safety. Sinclair remains at the rear of the column, determined to facilitate the escape of as many as possible. He is among the last to vacate the battlefield, while warriors pursue the disintegrating U.S. Army for several miles. The warriors of the Northwestern Confederacy return to their campsite to pillage and finish off the wounded, including Major General Butler. They celebrate their victory throughout the night. The Battle of the Wabash, later referred to as Sinclair's defeat, has concluded. The remaining U.S. forces do not halt until they reach Fort Jefferson that evening, having traveled a distance of 30 miles. Upon arrival, a roll call is conducted, revealing the staggering extent of their losses. 2/3 of the Army have either been killed, wounded, or are unaccounted for. All 6 artillery pieces have been lost, along with the baggage train and 1,200 muskets. Native American casualties are reported to be approximately 20 dead and 40 wounded. This engagement has resulted in a complete rout and a deeply humiliating defeat, marking the most significant loss the United States Army has ever experienced against Native Americans, surpassing the costs of any battle during the Revolutionary War. However, this outcome was not entirely unexpected. General Harmar, who had faced defeat at the hands of Little Turtle the previous year, had voiced serious concerns regarding Sinclair's expedition. Lieutenant Denny, who had the misfortune of serving in both campaigns, documented Harmar's observations. Harmar noted the composition of the Army, which consisted largely of men hastily gathered from urban streets and prisons thrust into enemy territory, with their commanding officers lacking the necessary experience for the task at hand. No single department was adequately prepared. Both the quartermaster and contractors were severely lacking. Harmar expressed astonishment that the commanding general, recognized as fully competent, would risk his reputation, life, and the lives of so many others under such dire circumstances. Aware of the formidable enemy he was to face, one potentially superior to an equal number of the best troops available, Sinclair's defeat ultimately prompted the first congressional investigation in the United States. The report exonerated Sinclair from personal responsibility. However, it identified numerous shortcomings in the planning and execution of his campaign. The subsequent U.S. general assigned to confront the Northwestern Confederacy, General Mad Anthony Wayne, would implement significant reforms within the U.S. Army. He would advocate for increased resources, enhanced professionalism, improved training and tactics, as well as superior reconnaissance. For the Native Americans, the Battle of the Wabash represented a remarkable triumph achieved through valor and strategic acumen. This victory highlights Little Turtle, Blue Jacket, and Bakonga Hellas as some of the most accomplished Native leaders in their resistance against the United States. Nevertheless, it also signifies the peak of their opposition. Their adversary would soon intensify the Northwest Indian War, ultimately leading to its resolution under General Wayne at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. The relentless expansion of the United States would persist,